it going? You're back at Ground Zero Salem with your host, friend, confidant, Pat. I have an update for you. I'd actually like to take a slightly different approach and focus on a couple of different labels. I tend to do that in my collecting sometimes where I discover a label I really like and I'll buy 2 or 3 things, buy them at once. That's what I did in this case, except for 1/3 of this, which was a stack of stuff from a specific label that a friend sent to me. And I'll get into that in a moment. Right now, we're listening to Infected, the probably 30th band called this. I did check on Metal Archives to see how many bands were called Infected. There's over 30. This one is from Switzerland, circa 1989. Cool kind of crossover-ish stuff. Musically, it's mostly thrash metal, maybe a little bit more on the basic side, like not too overtly technical, lots of double bass, pretty fast, kind of politically leaning, but with very deep growled death metal vocals, which is cool. I mean, I've heard the combination of thrash and death metal plenty of times. There's a lot of in-between there, especially in this time period. You know, that's one thing we focus on here at Ground Zero Salem fairly often. But this approach is interesting. It doesn't really sound like anybody else. It's pretty singular, pretty unique, which I'd say goes part and parcel with them being Swiss. You know, Messiah, nobody really sounds like Messiah. Nobody really sounds like Coroner. Nobody really sounds like Celtic Frost, for sure, other than worship bands. So just as a testament to that scene from that country, cool, unique stuff that you can't quite put your finger on. It's not crust punk. It's not straight up thrash. It's not grindcore. Very good. Very extensive liner notes. Long story about the band and how they formed. Some political awareness and activism that they're involved in, which is kind of uncommon for a metal band. So, cool. So, 3 labels. Motorpunk out of LA. You can use your imagination there as to what the bands on there sound like. Sure, you can put 2 and 2 together there. Got some classic Wild Rags stuff. If you didn't know Wild Rags, which you really should if you're into metal, it was a fly-by-night label from LA that reissued a lot of demos in a professional format for a lot of bands that ended up being formative, important bands for the evolution of extreme metal. Of course, Blasphemy, Internal Bleeding, whole host of others. I always do my research. There's tons and tons and tons of dead stock of Wild Rag stuff on eBay. And although I haven't come across anything that I hate on that label so far, there's a lot of stuff that I'm pretty lukewarm about. So I do blind buy fairly often, but with Wild Rag stuff, if I am not familiar with it, I'm going to look it up on YouTube first. But very happy. There's even one title in here that I've been wanting for quite a while. A couple of them, actually. Been kind of in the back of my mind on my want list. And then finally, a stack of stuff from Mortville Noise, which is in Ben Smasher's neck of the woods. He was kind enough to send some VCLT my way of some of their more recent releases, 5 to be exact. So, what should we talk about first? Let's tear into the Motorpunk stuff. As I alluded to, Motorpunk, LA label, lots and lots of metallic punk stuff, a lot of stuff that's Motorhead influenced, a lot of stuff that's early Bathory and Discharge and Broken Bones. You know what you're getting, which I'm totally cool with because that's one of my favorite pockets of music. First up is this collection of a band called Hard Charger from Canada, 2013 to 2018. This is a cool band, obvious Motorhead influence, as I was saying, but these guys are definitely crust punk adjacent with their approach. There's a lot of like kind of bluesy boogie rock moments that are very, very Motorhead, but there's a lot of like almost like this sort of reminds me of the slower, the more like catchier parts of Extreme Noise Terror or something, or like Tragedy. There's just that kind of approach to vocals is way more ode to like heavier crust punk than the music. But overall, it's a super catchy affair. Really good stuff. I don't know why I've never heard of these folks before. Hard to keep up with everything, but yeah, Hard Charger. Definitely hard, definitely charging. Imig Frost. I think that's how that's pronounced. Ain't No Saint. Again, as you can imagine, this sounds like Motorhead. Although, I will say they don't take the usual approach to Motorhead worship or heavily Motorhead-inspired music as a lot of other groups do. There's a little bit more of a clean thing to it, a clean sound to it. It's not as bass guitar driven as a lot of stuff like that, where the rumbly bass is just as loud as the guitar and doing the same stuff as guitar, which was, of course, a trademark of Motorhead. It's a little bit more, like upbeat, bluesy, anthemic. It feels almost kind of like 90s, as in terms of the recording quality. It's a little bit more like professional in a weird way. I don't know how to put it exactly. It's a little bit more clean and precise than a lot of stuff like that. There's other influences going into it as well. I'd say the vocal attack is considerably more like Thomas Gabriel Warrior or Baron from Amoebic sounding than Lemmy. And there's a straight up like bluesy blues, like down like a mid-paced bluesy rock song towards the end, which I really wasn't expecting. But yeah, that's cool. That's really good. Trying to remember where they're from, and it's escaping me at the moment. I don't think they're American. I'll put a caption. Then we've got Green Mantis from Mexico. Kill the Plague. This is the most different sounding out of all these, and probably the least straight up Motorhead influenced. It's got a lot of that sort of kind of like a Venom and early Sodom approach. It's way more thrash metal than any of these other releases. There's a lot more precision to it. It's got a dirty black rock and roll kind of Midnight or Venom sort of vibe, but there's a lot more, I'd say, like Teutonic thrash involved in the sound. It's just an EP. There's 5 songs on it. It's very, very good. Pretty shreddy. Then Unholy Night, Succubus, Russian band. I'd say a strong Chapel and Midnight, and of course Venom and early Bathory vibe with this as well. The vocalist's approach, Vika, her approach is a lot more like aggressive than those bands, though. It almost lapses into like a second wave black metal kind of shriek. Gets a little guttural here and there as well. And just like Ewig Frost, there's an odd sort of like bluesy, like mid-paced kind of bluesy rock song at the end of it, which adds a really interesting flavor to the more or less like fast approach to it. But yeah, good like black rock and roll, motor charged, Venom stuff. And then finally, this did not come out on Motorpunk Records. It was just available in their distro, but I figured I'd throw it in the pile. Rock and Roll Babylon by Inepsy. These folks kind of helped spearhead the revival of that sound. They were Canadian from Montreal. This is their second full length. If you don't know Inepsy, if you like stuff like Motorhead and Venom, you really need to check it out. They're kind of expanding their palette a little bit on the second one. It's got a bit more, there's a song or two on it that are a little bit more abrasive and aggressive, leaning towards like first wave black metal. And then there's a few songs on it that are more punk, more almost kind of like street punk, kind of thrown in the mix with all the kind of Motorhead discharge stuff that they were so good at. One of the best bands to do it outside of the Originators. Excellent band. Then we've got this Mortville Noise stuff that Ben sent me. Mortville Noise is a cool label. They, I believe, are based out of Iowa as well. Midwestern label, put out tons of grind stuff. Their CDs are really cheap. I think the only thing I owned by them previous to this was the Traffic Death discography, if I'm not mistaken. And I believe one of the members of Captain Three Leg is involved with running this, if I'm right. If not, I'm just gonna clip that out. I love editing. But at any rate, so here we have a stack of like ugly ass grind. I'll start with Wadge, because I've been hearing of Wadge for years. I've seen their splits all over the place. I seem to have memory of them having splits with like everybody and their mother. And those are included on here. This is 28 years of grind. Assembled Armaments and Exotic Lore. 2 CDs. Wild stuff. It's all like drum machine driven, hyper fast. There's a few songs that breach the minute-long mark, a few that even reach about 2, but most of it's over in the blink of an eye. Tons of splits, Splits with Needful Things, Shit on Command, Endless Blockade, Sanity's Dawn, Soil of Ignorance, Enemy Soil, Preparation H. Preparation H were great. I saw them once in Ohio. They were from Cincinnati. Really good. They had a split with Hellcrusher as well. Anyways, a lot of this is over in a blink of an eye, but I'm really surprised by how well a lot of it sticks with you. They kind of have an odd tiki theme on a lot of their stuff that Eric Bauer just talked about another one of their releases, and he pointed out that there's like odd surf moments. And that's kind of represented on here. There's a lot of stuff sort of leaning towards like death metal, death grind stuff, but a lot of it kind of remains in that sort of more of a hardcore grind kind of pocket, you know? Super important, been around forever, Canadian basement drum machine grindcore stuff. And then I think this is their most recent album, The End of Ethnology. There's like 28 songs or something like that on this bad boy. This seems a little bit more cleaned up. I don't hear too much of that whole tiki surf thing that they were doing earlier in their career on this. It is really good, though. It's a lot more like kind of straightforward, fast to the point, fastcore grind kind of stuff, like a good, strong, present, like fuzzy bass sound. That's cool. A similar sound I found was on the God's America release here, Crawling on the Planet's Face. This also brings to mind like early Iron Lung, Spaz when they're not being too silly. I'm trying to think. Who's the band that did the heavy metal vomit party? It'll come to me later. But that kind of bordering on power violence grind sort of approach, really fast to the point, present bass. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if this band wasn't a three-piece. Don't know off the top of my head. Super memorable, kind of noodly parts, almost sort of noisy. You can tell that they've probably listened to their fair share of Man is the Bastard and stuff like that. Then we've got a few that are leaning a little bit more towards the death metal side of things. Corpse Eater, German death grind, says right here, 38 tracks, 16 minutes. The stench of mutilated corpses. So, yeah, borderline, like deliberately offensive, death metal kind of stuff here. Death grind, rather. Not quite like the gore grind with the pitch-shifted vocals. A little bit more straightforward than that. But just rip your face off. Don't really give you a chance to breathe. Everything's, you know, like 30 seconds long, truncated, little blast beat-driven death metal mini symphonies. Then you got Ego Fix, Total Filth Squad, discography 95 to 97. Japanese band. Was not familiar with these folks before. They were heavily influenced by early earache stuff, particularly Napalm Death and Carcass. Very blown out sounding. If you enjoy Fear of God from Switzerland, just the general recording quality, so to speak, of the way that sounds with like the vocalist sounding like he's eating the mic kind of approach to grindcore. This is kind of a similar overall oral assault. I wouldn't say necessarily the music's identical. It's way more kind of riffy and focused in like an earache sort of way. But it's really good. I really like this a lot. It's very, very raw. Alright, so that's the Ego Fix stuff. Finally, this is going to be a short one, man. How long have I been recording for? Only 15 minutes. And that's before I edit out a bunch of crap. Wow. Anyways, finally we got we've got the Wild Rag stuff. And there were a few things. This was actually two separate eBay orders. I kind of kept tabs on the seller because I knew I wanted to go back a second time and buy some other stuff. I see the same stuff kind of up everywhere being sold by Wild Rags from different sellers on eBay. And a lot of it's kind of the more thrash metal stuff that I'm not really that interested in. I love finding obscure thrash a lot, as you can tell. But a lot of the stuff that from that particular genre, that particular neck of the woods sound-wise that Wild Rags did, doesn't really do it for me. I like more the death metal stuff that they put out. But at any rate, the biggest score from this whole thing, finding the seller, was getting this bad Larry. This is the Mindrot tape. You know, it was I don't know if it was considered a demo. Like I said, Wild Rags kind of reissued a lot of like demo recordings as official releases. It's a program repeats on both sides kind of deal with about, I think, 10 songs. This is classic American doom death. Mindrot definitely went in more of a, not symphonic, but more layered direction on their releases on Relapse and all that stuff. This was their earlier stuff that was way more heavily influenced by grind and crust, but it was still very, very slow-mo and kind of tortured. They did kind of flirt a bit with that sort of slap-a-hand power violence scene, I think, early on. It's not too dissimilar from where Morgion started from, as sort of like a rough, like, crusties playing death metal, or at least people from that sort of culture, you know, pumping that stuff out and then kind of expanding into this more like death doomy thing once they got better production. I actually found this it was a bit cheaper because it came with the cover of a different band, some band called Sufferance. No idea if they're any good or not. I do like this cover, but I was lucky enough to find pretty decent scan of this online, so I just printed it out. So now it's almost like I have the real thing. But yeah, highly recommended. I'll put a link to this. I've been wanting this for a long time. It's just raw, pummeling doom death with like crust overtones. It's awesome. Then Drogheda, Pogromist. I first became familiar with Drogheda when I picked up the Frozen Dawn compilations. I picked those up because my hometown band Violent Fury were on a couple of them, and I wanted to track down everything I possibly could by those folks. And I liked what I heard by Drogheda. It was kind of death metal. It's kind of grind. It was very, very, very lo-fi. Just subterranean sounding guitars that are tuned low and recorded low. Everything's just a big mushy mess. And I love it. It's super just primal sounding. Cro-Magnon, slope brow, hunter-gatherer. You can use every adjective that you've heard on YouTube in the past 5 years when talking about primitive death metal. I think it's way more apropos with this. This definitely sounds demented and weird and super heavy. It's from Ohio, Doylestown, Ohio, mid-90s. You could hear the kind of how out of the groundswell of this era, certain things like brutal death metal and gore grind and stuff were starting to emerge, but they hadn't really solidified so much yet, and this kind of sits in a nice place as a progenitor to all those kind of genres. This is a cool one. Humanicide, Human Right. This easily, if it had a different vocal approach, could be considered like some early technical death metal stuff, maybe. Like the Cynic demos or early Atheist or something like that. But the vocals are not of that style. They're more almost like a crossover-y, thrashy kind of yell. But very complex patterns, complex riffs, songwriting, complex song structures. Very interesting, kind of muddy production. I think this also is a combination of two different recording sessions. Wild Rags had a big tendency to do that, to just kind of throw a couple of demos onto one thing and not really tell you what's what. But this is a cool, technical thrash. The heaviness and the approach to the riffs almost are more of a death metal kind of thing, but the vocals aren't. Then, another example of like two demos being thrown on one tape kind of deal. Sadistic Torment. Oh, by the way, these folks were from Alabama, so that's interesting, kind of a vacuum of a scene there. Sadistic Torment were from Maryland. And same deal, the Unearthly Horrors demo, and then another demo from the year before, 94 and 95, respectively, is when all these came out. And this is a good example of the death metal scene frozen in amber right in the middle of the decade is basically what this is. You can hear the brutality that was to come with a lot of the kind of extreme tempo changes. They're going a lot crazier with the blasts. It's kind of bringing to mind like early Cataclysm, just almost uncontrollable blast beats that sound a little bit off, going off the rails. Very pingy snare sound as well. Not as pingy as Ping would become, of course, but there's all these kind of elements of brutality in it, but it's still satanic death metal inspired by Deicide and inspired by Acheron, probably bringing to mind Vital Remains, all that kind of stuff. But kind of reminds me a little bit of Violent Fury, actually, from the hometown there, where there was elements of like the Suffo kind of brutality, but also satanic stuff. Really, really good though. Raw production, almost painful to listen to. Just like scraping guitar sound, like the drums as loud as the guitars. It's like, I dig it. It's makes me uncomfortable to listen to it. It's awesome. And then finally, Judecca. Judecca's kind of along the same lines as Sadistic Torment. They were from Florida. There's a little bit more, like, for lack of a better term, like, atmospheric, like, you know, eerie Slayer by way of Merciful Fate kind of melodic parts on it. One or two places, but a lot of it's just kind of meat and potatoes, satanic death metal that's striving for something a little bit more brutal than what had come previously. It's a solid release. This is just a 5-song. Oh, sorry, no. This is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 9-song tape. That was another thing. Like these tapes weren't exactly cheap. They weren't breaking the bank, but I saw other things where I was like, this might be good, but it's only 4 songs. I'm not spending more than $10 for 4 songs. So, but anyway, yeah, this is worth it in the collection. I'm sure both of these are probably up on Ken's channel, Ken's Death Metal Crypt, Ken's Death Metal Crypt, if you want to check them out. I will leave links. I'm sure they're up somewhere. Yeah, that's it. That's all I got for this update. 23 minutes. Man. Well, I don't know. Take care, I guess. I'm going to shoot another one in a minute. How do you like that?